You can feel it on the road. A drive-through that once glowed like a beacon now sits dark. The sign flickering, the lot empty, except for a few blown wrappers. Another one gone. And the pattern keeps spreading town to town, mile to mile, as some of America's biggest fast food names slip into a quiet, uneven collapse. People sense the change in small, personal ways. A place that used to open at dawn now unlocks its doors hours late. A familiar menu arrives thinner, the food missing the weight and warmth it carried for decades. Chains that once held tens of thousands of locations have trimmed thousands over the past few years, with some losing as much as 1/3 of their entire footprint. Others have shut dozens of restaurants in a single season, folding under debt, higher costs, or shrinking traffic. By 2026, the decline is no longer background noise. It is national, visible, and accelerating. Right now, we're taking a grounded look at 10 fast food chains that are collapsing, and why so many Americans feel the loss so sharply. Number 1. Boston Market. Boston Market once operated more than 1,200 restaurants across the country. Today, only a small handful remain open, a collapse so steep that it has become one of the clearest examples of how fast food decline can feel, both sudden and strangely slow. Court records show unpaid rents stretching into many months, halted operations, wage disputes, and supply interruptions that left individual stores without the ability to function. States issued stop work orders, landlords locked doors, bills stacked higher than revenue could ever catch up. The company even attempted a bankruptcy filing only to let the process stall when it failed to continue showing up in court. Across years, the chain's footprint thinned from a familiar roadside presence to a scattered network of locations struggling on their own islands. The decline did not arrive through one dramatic moment. It crept through small operational breakdowns that compounded long before the public noticed. Kitchens ran with fewer ingredients. Store hours drifted. Equipment repairs were delayed for weeks. Staff turnover accelerated. Customers walked in and sensed the erosion, not through one detail, but through the broader feeling that the place no longer carried the warmth that once defined it. By contrast, Boston Market had always lived inside a narrow promised comfort food without the work. Families leaned on the chain during holidays and busy weeks. Workers stopped in for rotisserie plates that felt steadier than most fast food meals. That identity held value for decades, and it anchored the brand far more than any corporate marketing campaign. Yet the slow internal breakdown chipped away at that foundation until the idea collapsed under its own weight. Once a company can no longer maintain consistent food quality store upkeep or basic payroll, the brand weakens in ways customers immediately recognize, even if they cannot name the cause. Later on, the closures accelerated across multiple states. Town after town reported locked doors without warning. Some locations sat furnished, but abandoned lights off signs still hanging. Others emptied out quickly, leaving only bare walls and a few scrap fixtures. Entire regions lost what was once a common weekday stop. The retreat created an odd silence on roads where Boston Market signs had been a part of the landscape for nearly 30 years. In the end, the fall of Boston Market reflects a national pattern. A fast food chain rarely disappears through one failure. It erodes through cost pressures, shrinking traffic, outdated operations, and debt that grows faster than revenue can cover. When a company reaches that point, the decline does not feel like business news. It feels like a fading light on a familiar map. The loss becomes visible every time a driver passes an empty building that once served steady meals to steady crowds. Boston Market shows how quickly a long-standing name can vanish once the internal structure collapses, and how the disappearance of a chain can leave behind a quiet gap in neighborhoods that counted on its routine presence. Number 2. Subway. Boston Market fell fast. Subway, in contrast, is shrinking in a way that feels drawn out, measured, and driven less by sudden collapse than by the economics of a system aging from the inside. The brand once held more than 27,000 American stores in the mid-2010s, a density unmatched by any other chain. Across markets, that massive footprint is now thinning every year, forced not by dramatic shutdowns but by slow, unglamorous math. Rent rises, labor costs climb, ingredients cost more, franchisees take home less. A network built on low pricing and overwhelming store volume is now bending under the weight of modern expenses. The raw data shows the shift clearly. Subway has already shed thousands of domestic locations over the past decade, slipping below 20,000 units for the first time in roughly 20 years. Under those forces, the chain's promise of low-cost meals collides with an economic environment that no longer supports razor-thin margins. A franchisee who once survived on steady foot traffic now faces customers who visit less often, buy fewer extras, and react sharply to any price change. Even a small rise in bread produce or protein costs can erase the fragile earnings of stores that never had the buffer enjoyed by larger competitors. By comparison, the company's public narrative leans on smart growth. Modernization, remodels, international expansion. The message suggests reinvention rather than retreat. Yet, the American map tells a different story. Through each contraction, Subway's presence becomes patchier, leaving counties that once held many stores now down to a scattered few. The footprint that remains reflects a system under pressure: older buildings, difficult to upgrade locations that never fully recovered from post-pandemic traffic patterns, and franchise contracts written in a different economic era. Operational strain appears in quieter ways than the chaos that swallowed Boston Market. Subway rarely leaves abandoned rooms or locked doors overnight. Instead, hours shorten, staff numbers shrink, maintenance waits longer. A location that once felt consistent starts to wobble around the edges. The simplicity that carried the chain for decades' bread toppings volume becomes brittle when costs rise faster than menu prices can follow. Eventually, even a system built on standardization feels the drag of scale. More stores mean more leases, more equipment, more labor shifts, and more opportunities for margin to evaporate. Toward that outcome, the chain's future in the United States takes on a dim outline. Picture an aging strip mall at dusk, the Subway sign still glowing, but the interior nearly empty. A lone employee wipes a counter that no longer sees the rush it once did. Across the lot, another former location sits dark, its shape barely visible beneath a faded awning. Number 3. Steak and Shake. The lunch hour lands with a hollow thud. A room built for noise sits still, the clack of trays replaced by the soft whir of a ceiling fan turning above empty booths. Light washes across the black and white tiles in wide, colorless bands, revealing how much space goes unused. The air carries none of the warm grill scent that once greeted customers before they even stepped inside. It feels less like a restaurant between rushes and more like a place caught between versions of itself, unsure which one it belongs to anymore. Afterward, the deeper problem becomes obvious. Steak and Shake no longer carries the comfort people once attached to it. For many, this chain was a dependable spot after school games, late-night drives, work breaks, or slow Sunday lunches. Families counted on the same thin fries, the same tall shakes, the same stainless steel counters. Losing that consistency has hit harder than the company seems willing to acknowledge. The menu still exists, but the emotional thread that tied people to this place has frayed. Over in another corner, an older customer sits with a to-go cup, staring at the dining room with a look that is more searching than nostalgic. He has seen this space full. He has heard it loud. He remembers when lines snaked past the door and workers moved in practiced rhythm. Now he taps the table lightly as if trying to summon the version of the restaurant that once felt woven into his routine. A young couple nearby murmurs about the shift to kiosks and beef tallow fries, trading memories of what the place used to taste like. Their voices carry a small ache, not just for the food, but for the familiarity that food represented. As hours pass, the numbers give shape to that ache. The chain has shuttered more than 200 restaurants since the late 2010s, pulling out of states where it had held loyal crowds for decades. A loan exceeding $220 million brought it to the edge of bankruptcy before being resolved. Entire markets lost the footprint that once defined local strips and late-night culture. Analysts point to rising labor costs, equipment breakdowns, franchise turbulence, and a branding pivot that felt abrupt and mismatched with the chain's long-standing identity. By evening, the interior looks like a memory more than a business. The booths still shine, but the emptiness makes even familiar colors feel distant. Workers move through routines that were meant for larger crowds, their pace steady, but their surroundings out of sync. The restaurant has become a symbolic casualty of a changing industry, a place people expected would always be there, quietly slipping into a pattern of reduced hours, smaller crews, and fewer reasons for customers to return. In closing moments, the wait settles in full, the grill cools early, the lights dim before darkness settles outside. And as the day ends, the building stands like a hollowed-out landmark of a past rhythm, a reminder of how much emotional space a simple diner can occupy and how sharply it hurts when that space empties without ceremony. Number 4. Hardee's. What happens to a regional fast food chain when its cost structure rises faster than its strategy evolves? From a distance, Hardee's looks like a company pushed into retreat by a combination of mounting expenses, aging stores, and franchise groups unable to keep up with modern operational demands. The closures of recent years, many driven by bankrupt franchisees, reveal a system that struggled to adjust to the economic realities of the 2020s. Hardee's lost more than a dozen locations in Georgia after one major operator collapsed, with similar exits reported across several Midwestern and Southern states. These are not isolated events. They form a pattern that exposes deeper structural misalignments. Within that pattern, the brand's missteps appear less dramatic and more procedural. Hardee's built its identity on hearty breakfast items and charbroiled burgers. But these strengths require equipment labor and prep routines that are harder to scale efficiently than competitors offering simpler menus. Rising labor costs and equipment maintenance hit Hardee's harder than chains with tighter menus. At the same time, lunch and dinner traffic weakened in several regions as competitors invested more aggressively in digital ordering loyalty programs and drive-through modernization. Hardee's moved but not fast enough, leaving many locations unable to generate the volume needed to cover higher costs. Beyond the surface, industry analysts have pointed to the chain's franchise model as a key tension point. Many Hardee's franchisees operate in rural or lower traffic markets where small changes in food or labor costs can erase already narrow margins. Dr. James Allen, a restaurant economist at Middle Tennessee State University, explained it plainly. When a brand built on low-density markets faces sustained cost inflation, the math becomes unforgiving. Stores that were barely viable begin to slip under even minor pressure. That pressure accelerated after the pandemic when supply fluctuations and wage increases reshaped the economics of every quick-service restaurant. Under these conditions, Hardee's faces more than an image problem. It faces an efficiency challenge. Some stores still operate with legacy equipment, slower drive-through design, and dining rooms larger than modern traffic can justify. The menu asks for more prep work than its closest competitors. The logistics of supporting dispersed rural markets add another layer of cost. These factors do not doom the brand, but they do explain why so many franchisees found themselves unable to keep pace. Toward a workable path, the company has begun pushing modernization efforts, streamlined operations, smaller prototypes, and investment in drive-through speed. Analysts suggest that Hardee's must continue narrowing equipment, needs simplifying prep routines, and leaning harder into the breakfast segment where it still holds competitive strength. With targeted remodeling and tighter control over franchise operations, the chain can stabilize rather than shrink. The outlook that follows is steady and unsentimental, a business with fewer stores, tighter operations, more disciplined financial structures, and a future shaped not by expansion, but by its ability to hold ground where economics still favor its model. Number 5. Wendy's. Wendy's once grew with a confidence that felt effortless, yet the distance between that past momentum and its present contraction has never been clearer. Across former years, the brand built its reputation on steady expansion, reliable foot traffic, and a menu that carried enough distinctiveness to set it apart from its burger competitors. In the late 2010s, Wendy's hovered near 6,000 domestic restaurants, adding new units even in slower periods. By contrast, the past few years reveal a marketplace where holding ground is harder than gaining it. At this stage, the company has projected the closure of well over 100 underperforming locations, with analysts estimating that a mid-single-digit percentage of its footprint may be trimmed through 2026. Against earlier patterns, the data shows a clear shift in posture. Determined expansion has given way to strategic pruning. In some regions, older stores with high maintenance needs have fallen behind traffic expectations. In others, rising labor and commodity costs have compressed margins to the point where remodels became mandatory rather than optional. The math behind those decisions is plain. Wendy's aims to open roughly 250 to 300 new units, while retiring a smaller but meaningful cluster of existing ones, effectively trading weaker stores for stronger prototypes. Both the scale and the direction differ sharply from its momentum of a decade ago. Within current constraints, the gap becomes even more visible on the ground. A strong Wendy's of the past had a certain energy, a lunch crowd that formed early dining rooms that hummed with steady conversation, and crews who moved with the rhythm of predictable volume. Today, a pressured location can feel noticeably thinner. The menu board is brighter, the equipment more modern. Yet the atmosphere carries a quieter tone, marked by shorter staff rosters, more reliance on digital orders, and a drive-through that handles a higher share of traffic, while the dining room sits partially unused. The operational issues underlying the shift are structural rather than sentimental. Supply volatility, wage increases, and higher capital costs have reshaped the economics of every fast food chain. For Wendy's, the challenge lies in balancing modernization with long-term financial discipline. New prototypes are more efficient, but upgrading older stores requires investment levels that some franchisees hesitate to take on. The brand's leadership has been explicit about redirecting resources toward remodeling pathways, leaning into smaller footprints, redesigned kitchens, and stronger digital integration. These moves are rational, but they highlight how far the present differs from the expansion era that shaped many Americans' memories of the chain. As the shifts continue, the contrast feels less like decline and more like recalibration. Wendy's is not collapsing. It is narrowing, tightening, and repositioning for a future where efficiency outweighs scale. The landscape that follows will hold fewer stores, stronger averages, and a network that depends more heavily on modern design than raw footprint. And as Wendy's adjusts to that new reality, another major player faces its own battle with aging stores, high remodeling costs, and a thinning map. A story that becomes clearer as we move to Burger King. Number 6. Burger King. I used to walk into Burger King certain I knew what I was getting. Across earlier visits, the routine felt dependable, a Whopper that tasted exactly the same, no matter which town I stopped, in fries that came out hot enough to fog the window on the drive home, and a dining room that carried the familiar smell of charbroil and fryer oil. For a long time, that predictability was the entire point. You went to Burger King because it never surprised you. Through those years, even small slips felt forgivable, part of the rhythm of fast food, rather than a sign of anything bigger. But patterns change quietly, and the shift here has been more gradual than dramatic. A slow fade instead of a sharp break. In my own experience, the first sign came from the food. Burgers that arrived lukewarm, buns that fell apart too quickly, lettuce that looked tired before I even unwrapped the sandwich. The portions felt a little lighter, the fries carried less crispness, and the flame-grilled flavor that once defined the chain often tasted faint, as though the signature step had been rushed or uneven. None of these moments were catastrophic, but each one chipped at the memory of what the place used to be. Over time, the gaps stacked into something noticeable. Service followed the same path. Lines moved slower even when the restaurant was nearly empty. Orders came out incomplete often enough that I started checking the bag before leaving. Staff turnover seemed high, and the tone behind the counter shifted from steady to strained. These details don't show up in official reports, but you feel them as a customer. A place that once ran with a certain rhythm now moves with hesitation, adjusting to shortages of people, time, and calm. According to recent reviews, these experiences are not isolated. Online threads on Reddit describe late-night visits where drive-thru windows stayed closed despite posted hours. Google reviews include photos of messy dining rooms, missing items, and undercooked food. Complaints on X highlight waits stretching past 20 minutes for simple orders even outside peak hours. The tone isn't angry, it is weary. People writing not to vent, but to confirm that others notice the same slide. Anchor facts add weight to the picture. Burger King has closed more than 400 domestic stores in the past few years, driven largely by franchise failures, declining traffic, and the rising cost of bringing older restaurants up to standard. The brand has committed over $400 million toward modernization, but even executives admit the recovery will take several years. The gap between the chain's bold past and its pressured present is wide enough that the comeback feels more like a rebuild than a tune-up. Toward the version that remains, the imagery is hard to ignore. A dim dining room at dusk, one register open a short line, waiting with a kind of patient resignation, and a menu board glowing brighter than the room around it. And as I walk out with a meal that tastes almost familiar, the thought that stays is simple: some places fade long before anyone says goodbye. Number 7. Denny's. More than 100 Denny's locations have closed across the country in the past few years. Across the overnight hours, that number feels heavier than it looks on paper, especially for someone who spent years working the late shift. There was a time when 2 in the morning meant full booths, coffee pots steaming nonstop, and a steady hum of truckers, students, night shift nurses, and musicians rolling in after gigs. The doors never locked, the lights never dimmed. The place worked on its own rhythm, one that made sense only to the people who lived outside daytime schedules. That rhythm held the brand together for decades, and when it started slipping, the decline didn't arrive suddenly. It leaked into the room slowly, hour by hour. From that moment, you could feel the culture changing. Customers who once stayed for refills and conversations began drifting to drive-through chains open 24 hours. The post-midnight crowds thinned as younger diners leaned toward delivery apps instead of late-night tables. The cost of keeping a full staff overnight rose. College hangouts moved online. Even the old quiet debates over which breakfast combo was best started fading out. Within that culture, Denny's didn't just lose traffic. It lost the ecosystem that made 24-hour diners essential. A world that no longer keeps late hours has less room for a restaurant built around them. Under shifting patterns, the operational strain grew visible. Staffing became unpredictable. Some nights ran with only 2 people on the floor. Equipment that once ran around the clock began breaking down, and repairs took longer because overnight crews couldn't cover gaps. Food that used to move quickly stayed in storage longer, and consistency slipped. The vibe changed in small ways. A slower refill, a lukewarm plate, or music left off because no one had time to adjust it. These aren't catastrophic issues, but they erode a place that once felt like a steady anchor for anyone awake when the rest of the city slept. Anchor facts make the contraction clearer. Several franchise groups filed for bankruptcy over rising costs and falling traffic. Many locations dropped 24-hour service, reverting to limited schedules for the first time in decades. Some older buildings too large and too expensive to maintain under new economics were simply retired. As the map thins, the brand's footprint reflects a shift. No remodel can fully fix America's late-night culture has shrunk, and Denny's is shrinking with it. The present-day scene carries that reality in plain view. A store that once buzzed at 2 in the morning now sits half-lit by 10 in the evening. A booth or two is filled, a couple eating quietly, a driver grabbing a meal between jobs. The rest of the room feels wider than it used to. The sounds sharper, the pauses longer. The griddle still sizzles, but without the energy that once made even slow nights feel alive. And in that thinner, gentler version of the place, you understand that Denny's didn't fall, it simply outlasted the world it was built for. Number 8. IHOP. Breakfast chains either adapt to new eating habits or slowly lose the space they once held. Across the later mornings, that truth becomes easy to see if you used to stop by IHOP as often as I did. For years, late breakfast there felt like a dependable pause, a table full of steam from fresh coffee, a griddle working non-stop, and the steady rotation of families, night shift workers and retirees settling in for pancakes that tasted the same every time. It wasn't excitement that drew you in, it was rhythm. From my earlier visits, that rhythm made even slow days feel anchored, as though IHOP worked on a schedule older than the menu itself. By the time menus expanded, the cracks began to show. The chain kept adding limited-time stacks, flavored syrups, oversized combos, and seasonal experiments. The laminated pages grew thicker. The choices multiplied faster than the kitchen could stabilize them. 2 short conclusions followed. Dishes became less consistent, and wait times stretched longer even when crowds were smaller. And beneath those shifts sat a longer truth. The simplicity that once defined IHOP no longer held the center of the brand. Under these shifts, the service changed too. Some mornings felt understaffed from the moment you walked in. Orders arrived out of sequence. Coffee refills lagged. A plate that used to hit the table with a certain heat now landed lukewarm, as if the handoff from griddle to table moved through more steps than before. The staff did what they could, but the strain lingered in the small things. A tone that sounded tired. A table that waited too long to be cleared, a kitchen that seemed to juggle too many menu paths at once. Those details didn't feel malicious or careless, just stretched, like a place trying to keep up with expectations that no longer fit its structure. Anchor facts support what regulars have felt. IHOP's same-store sales growth flattened in several recent quarters. The company has closed dozens of underperforming locations, with franchise operators citing rising food costs, higher wages, and intense competition from faster, cheaper breakfast options. Many stores have dropped late-night hours. Some older buildings haven't seen major remodels in more than a decade. And the shift in American breakfast habits toward grab-and-go sandwiches, drive-through orders, or delivery apps has weakened the dining room model IHOP relied on for so long. As routines change, the chain stands in the middle of a market that no longer moves at the pace it was built to serve. The present-day atmosphere reflects that gap without trying to hide it. A location that once stayed lively past 11 now sits half full just after 9. The griddle sound is softer. The dining room feels wider. The smell of pancakes still rolls through, but without the constant turnover that used to carry the place from morning into noon. And as I finish a meal that tastes familiar yet slightly thinner around the edges, the sense that remains is simple. IHOP's future may depend less on its menu and more on how America decides to eat breakfast in the years ahead. Number 9. Panera Bread. Panera went from a reliable lunch spot to a place where the bill feels heavier than the meal. Across former lunches, that difference used to be minor, a couple of extra dollars here or there. But it grew fast enough that regulars like me started noticing the gap before management ever acknowledged it. What once felt like a comfortable middle ground between fast food and sit-down dining now sits awkwardly between them, carrying prices closer to the latter and portions closer to the former. From the first comparison, you could see its soups served in smaller bowls, sandwiches with thinner fillings, and drinks that somehow cost more each season. By the latest changes, the shift felt less like inflation and more like a structural mismatch. A simple you pick two often reaches well above $15 before tax, and a full salad plus drink can push past $20 depending on the location. Those numbers might land cleanly on a corporate spreadsheet, but they land differently with customers who remember when Panera's appeal was built on value as much as comfort. The brand tried to stretch into a premium category without upgrading the experience that would justify that move. Within the ordering flow, the inconsistencies show up quickly. A bowl of broccoli cheddar might arrive perfectly thick one day and watery the next. Bread that used to have a firm exterior now feels softer, almost rushed. Sandwiches vary by store, by shift, by hour. Even the famous mac and cheese, once a stable anchor, swings between rich and pale depending on who prepares it. The digital system introduced to streamline orders often complicates them. Instead, wrong customizations, items missing from pickup shelves, or delays caused by kitchen screens struggling under stacked mobile tickets. Anchor facts solidify the picture. Panera has slowed its unit growth and closed dozens of underperforming stores over the past several years while leaning heavily into digital channels, which now account for more than half of all transactions. The company faces rising labor expenses, soaring ingredient costs, and operational strain from maintaining both dine-in service and high-volume digital fulfillment. Several franchise groups have cited remodel costs and shifting traffic patterns as reasons for reducing their footprints. As expectations thin, the brand's once steady lunch crowd has fragmented into quicker, cheaper alternatives that better match the weekday pace. The present-day atmosphere reflects these changes in ways small but telling. A bright row of self-order screens stands where a staffed counter once moved smoothly. The pickup shelf fills unevenly with some bags ready and others waiting for sauces, sides, or corrections. The dining room feels quieter than it used to with fewer laptops open, fewer conversations running long, and more customers grabbing their meals without lingering. The smell of warm bread and simmering soup still rolls through, but it doesn't carry the same promise of comfort that defined the chain's earlier years. And as I leave with a lunch that costs more than it feels worth, the thought that lingers is simple. Panera is still shifting, and it's not clear yet where it plans to land. Number 10. Red Lobster. Across the final turns of this collapse, Red Lobster feels different from the others. The chain's decline doesn't read like a slow erosion or a long drift away from relevance. It looks more like a structure that held itself together, longer than it should have, then buckled once the pressure reached its limit. From the outside, the fall seems abrupt, but the underlying stress has been present for years, spreading across decisions that never fully match the economics of a changing industry. Through prior ownership layers, the vulnerabilities deepened. Private equity shifts left the brand carrying obligations that never aligned with its actual sales rhythm. Remodel plans stalled. Menu strategy drifted. Franchise negotiations dragged while traffic weakened. By the chain's own math, too many locations relied on promotions to fill seats rather than predictable demand. The seafood category carries higher volatility than most fast casual lanes, and Red Lobster had less room for missteps than it assumed. One short moment pushed things over the edge. The endless shrimp decision, a well-intended attempt to revive traffic, became a financial hole almost immediately. Corporate leadership underestimated consumption. Per guest underestimated labor impact, underestimated food cost inflation, and overestimated the ability of stores to make up losses through upsells. Under the strain of fixed costs, the chain bled money faster than expected, and what was supposed to be a traffic booster turned into a multiplier for existing weaknesses. Server reports from multiple markets described kitchens overwhelmed, shrimps running low mid-shift, and margins thinning until the promotion became impossible to sustain. The move was bold, but the math behind it cracked the foundation that was already stressed. Anchor facts carry the weight clearly. Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy in the year 2024 after reporting estimated losses in the hundreds of millions. More than 100 locations closed within weeks, and court documents revealed persistent issues with rising lease obligations, supply volatility, and declining dine-in traffic. Several suppliers noted that the chain's seafood cost structure was unusually fragile, depending on high volume that the stores could no longer maintain. As the final filings showed, even moderate dips in customer flow destabilized entire regions of the business. A walk through surviving locations captures the moment better than any report. Some dining rooms appear dim despite operating hours. Booths sit untouched with biscuit baskets stacked neatly, as if expecting a crowd that never arrives. The bar area stays still with only a few drinks resting on coasters that once turned over dozens of times a night. Illuminated signs flicker in places not bright enough to cover the space where maintenance budgets ran thin. Staff work with professionalism, but you can sense the strain and the careful pacing of each movement. The entire atmosphere feels suspended, like a place waiting for instructions that may never come. And when stepping back from the doorway, the impression that settles is quiet and plain. Red Lobster's collapse is not finished echoing, and the remaining pieces may shift long after the lights finally dim. Across the country, the fall of these chains feels less like the end of restaurants, and more like the end of certain routines we once took for granted. These places shaped commutes, lunch breaks, late-night stops, first jobs, and weekend habits, and their decline signal shifts far bigger than any single brand. Rising costs, shifting expectations, and the weight of outdated models all collided at the same time, leaving even the most established names struggling to keep pace. And as storefronts dim, the landscape keeps rearranging itself. Some companies may rebuild, some may vanish quietly, others may change beyond recognition. But the pattern is set. The fast food world of the coming years will not look like the one Americans grew up with. So as we close this look at 10 collapsing giants, one message remains steady. Pay attention to the changes around you because the next chapter has already begun.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.